Welcome back to the Main Stand podcast. Mitchell, Josh, and Pat here. We've got European football back finally, club football back finally. Boys, how are we feeling?
That's a really good intro, Mitch. You nailed it the first
First
time
try.
for
First
sure.
try. Exactly.
It's a great week when Europe's back. I think we had the. I was saying this on Taylor Mannix's show last week. You have the first international break in September, and that first weekend where football's back after that international break, and then usually Europe hits like that next week after. It's kind of tough to beat that. There's a crisp in the air. You know, your team's playing a big match at home in the Champions League or Europa League. It's hard to beat.
Or Europa League. Had to fit that one in with Liverpool down there now.
Yeah.
Hey, we've got two Europa League correspondents on the podcast this season, so strap in.
Could never be me.
All trophies are important. Your Europa League, it's a big competition. We got to go all in now.
You're right. You're right. You're so right.
No, for real though, the finals in Dublin this year, so I'm all about Liverpool making it to a final in Dublin. That would be
That
sick.
would be fucking cool. Yeah.
But
I give it to
Silverware
you.
is good.
It would be.
let's get the conversation going, boys. It started off hot with I think a couple big kind of matches, at least on paper. The first one that I was really excited for was Newcastle Milan. Just like seeing Newcastle back in the Champions League was like kind of 80s 90s vibes a little bit. And this has been a storyline on the podcast for a little bit now. Are alarms starting to ring for you guys on this Newcastle team? It ended in a 0-0 draw for everyone who maybe didn't watch the game, but
Yes. Yeah. Newcastle has been on fraud watch since like week 3 for me. They're missing something, man. I don't know if it's an experience in the squad. I mean, it was really cool to see Jacob Murphy all smiley and happy with the Champions League anthem playing, and like that's really cool. And I'm really happy for him and the squad. And I think everybody feels that way when they're playing in Europe. But I think that just showed, man. Like a lot of these guys, they haven't been there before.
Right.
And I don't see a deep Champions League run out of this Milan team. Unfortunately, it'd be cool to see them do it. But when we talk about Europa League, I think we'll see some parallels with another English Premier League team that's playing in Europe for the first time. But I don't. They look fine. They just don't really have that like cutting edge I think you need in European football. I think in club football at the like country level league. There we go. That's the word I was looking for. At the league level, you can kind of have slow starts because it's a 38 game season. You can't do that in the Champions League. You kind of have to come out firing from week 1. And I'm just going to need to see a little bit more out of Newcastle in the coming weeks before I'm really ready to say that they've taken that next step.
Mitch, any thoughts?
I have to agree. I think it was an exciting start to the Premier League debut for them, but since then they've lacked that gusto. And against a Milan team that we've seen struggle over the last couple of years in European football, obviously making it to a semifinal last year against Inter turned out to be a fraud watch game. It was very messy. And it kind of has leaked into the start of the Champions League this year as well.
Yeah, and they're not the hardest team in this group either. They're going to have to go against a hard PSG side and a hard Dortmund side as well. So this might just be the beginning of a tough campaign for Newcastle abroad. And I
do
think,
actually think they. Sorry to cut you off, Josh. I do actually think that AC Milan team are good, though. I think they made some pretty good signings in the transfer window.
Oh, yeah.
I wouldn't just say they're the weakest team in the group. I could very easily see them getting out ahead of Dortmund or even PSG. I'm not convinced by PSG at all, but we'll get there.
No, that's not what I was. I really like AC Milan too. I'm saying that Newcastle will have harder games than this, and the fact that they went to the San Siro, and I think even saying playing fine is a compliment to Newcastle on the night because I mean they got dominated in pretty much every single facet of the game. And I think most people would agree that they're lucky to even come out with a point. Probably should have been 2 or 3-0 if Giroud would have been a little bit just more straightforward with his finishing. But
Yeah.
it's a start for Newcastle. I imagine for those fans, just like getting to go abroad, to talk about like 3 class trips abroad too for those Newcastle fans. Must have been a fun one. It is good to see them back in a top competition, I will say.
I'd agree with that. Yeah, and then I don't really know if PSG Dortmund was much to talk about other than the fact that Dortmund looked pretty poor against a PSG team that I'm not, like I said, I'm not super convinced by. You know, like 2 weeks ago, they lost 3-2 to Lille. They haven't looked like the normal, unbelievably imperious, impossible to catch team that you normally see in what is probably the weakest league in top European competition, like in the top 5-6 leagues. It's probably one of the weaker in terms of overall quality, and they haven't looked amazing either there. So this PSG team, I don't think is super great either. Mbappe in the side or not, I'm not super sold on them either. I think that's really my main takeaway for them after week 1.
Yeah, I think they'll pretty likely win the group, but not going to make it much farther in the knockouts for sure. They're just a strong team on paper, I think. A team that is going to be a huge favorite to win the whole thing, not Pat's Man City, Real Madrid sneaking out another late Jude Bellingham victory.
I'm not convinced by them at all, man.
No?
They should have beat the hell out of that side. They look horrible up front. They can't finish. They're relying on Jude Bellingham tap-ins to win games. I think they're good and they're definitely a favorite, but I'm not sold on them either by any stretch of the imagination.
We've saw slow starts from Real Madrid in the Champions League in the past few years, to be fair. I think last year they lost to Sheriff in the first match.
They did.
It's true.
So, I mean, it is what it is. I think I'm just impressed by I think this Madrid team will click eventually. I think they've had a decent start to the year. The fact that they're grinding games out and finding goals late on this early in the season, when things are, do begin getting easier, I think that bodes well for them. And I just want to talk about Jude Bellingham for a second, because what a start to his life at Real Madrid. Talk about a way to endear yourself to fans. 6 goals in 6 games and some big match-winning goals as well.
Yeah, they're definitely
it's a really good start for him.
Carrying over the Champions League, putting him on quite the pedestal for kind of a crusty tap-in at the death. Very easily could have gone both ways too. Geraldo Becker puts a little bit of a better ball into Aronson right after he comes on. It's a 1-1 game, and they're slipping points away early again. So I'm not convinced by Real Madrid yet. I think they have a very aging midfield. Tchouaméni's still not getting kind of into the rotation. They've bolstered with younger talent. Jude obviously earning his spot with how he's been playing. I'm just not convinced yet.
That is true. I'm not either, but I will say, regardless of what any of us think about Real Madrid and how bad or good they look in the Champions League, they are Real Madrid in the Champions League, and they have the vibes. So they're going to be just fine. They'll probably make a semifinal.
Say it, the Champions League aura.
They have it almost
every time we talk about them. They do, and
they'll be semifinalists. They'll make a semifinal easily.
They'll slap together a performance. Ancelotti's always got something up.
Pick his eyebrow up. He can just pick his eyebrow up, and they'll score 2 goals.
Stink face.
Pat, I'll give you the floor now, because I'm not sure. We don't like PSG already. You're not sold on Real Madrid. Was there a team in the field that you were convinced could be an early competitor for City? Anyone that caught your eye? I can guess that you might say Arsenal.
Crazy. I am going to say Arsenal, man. I really am. I think the inexperience is going to get them in the later stages of the competition. But if they can just keep doing what we've seen them do, they crack. They are folding under pressure a lot of the time, and I know that. I know that that's true. But they have a really good side. They have a really exciting side. Where they've made signings has helped the team. Shai Havertz actually looked pretty comfortable up front for Arsenal in that game for them. Odegaard looks like he can be a very capable captain in Europe. Jesus played a really good game the experience that they have in the Champions League in a couple of key places, Zinchenko being a really important piece in a Man City team that's been in a semifinal and a Champions League final with him in the team. Gabriel Jesus has like 29 GA in the Champions League. I saw tweets about people being surprised by that, and I think that's really funny because he came from a team that made it every single year he was there. But they have the correct experience in the right places. Bringing in Declan Rice, who, yes, it was a Conference League, say what you want, but they have a player in that side now who's won a European final, which is something that not a lot of the guys in that team can say. So I think that if they get the leadership right in the correct places, they could make a surprisingly deep run in this competition. And I did think Bayern looked all right too. I think shipping 3 goals at home to United isn't super impressive, but they have the firepower up front, and Bayern Munich are another team similar to Madrid, similar to Liverpool. They kind of just have something about them in the Champions League where you expect them to do well, and I expect them to do well and continue on through the group stage pretty comfortably and be a team that comes later as well. And we see in, a semifinal at the least, a quarterfinal, depending on who they play. But they're another really, really good side too that I definitely see as a secondary set of favorites to City, who I think could very easily win 2 Champions Leagues in a row.
Yeah, I would say the path is there for Man City, but like most Champions Leagues, I think so much of it depends on what your path looks like. If you have a really hard knockout, a few knockout rounds, that can just totally shift the dynamic of your run. So we'll have to wait.
And you say that, but then you look at their run last year.
Yeah, and sometimes like playing the harder teams kind of breeds that. But I mean, when you look at like Liverpool's runs too in the past couple years, we've had so many like favorable runs that I think it was like almost it just made it easier. So you never know. But
that's true. No, that's very true. But I would say early days. I still think, especially now that they've won it, and it's a squad full of guys that have won it. I think it's really hard to say anybody other than Man City is winning the Champions League again, bar Real Madrid doing a Real Madrid or getting like a plucky underdog kind of coming through the ranks and making a big push somewhere. And I didn't really see any team in the opening stages that really, really struck me as a team that could do that. I can see a run from a team like AC Milan, maybe if they get out of this group. But outside of that, there wasn't a ton of teams that weren't expected to be as good as they were that were like overly impressive. It's not like we were seeing like a Monaco of a few years ago or an Ajax of 2019, a Napoli of last year. There aren't really any teams that feel like that right now for me.
Yeah, I like your shout with Bayern earlier. I think Kane naturally fits into that side, and he just like fills the Lewandowski hole that they've been trying to kind of replace. So I think Bayern will get better as the year goes on too. And they could have won that game against United by a few more. Those end goals by Casemiro were a bit scrappy.
They're very scrappy.
So I think all in all, that was a pretty good showing from Bayern if you look at the whole performance, from a 90-minute perspective. But they're definitely going to be, I think, one of the contenders along with, a City and Real Madrid to win this year, which I don't think we were as hot on Bayern last year.
No, but at home, would you expect Bayern to score more against a team like United that have struggles in net and struggles defensively and struggles in the midfield? I feel like I expected,
yes and no.
I feel like I just expected more out of Bayern in that opening match at home against a side that really hasn't found their footing yet. And with a keeper like Onana who is in shambles, it feels like very big Kepa vibes. If I do say so myself.
Real. You're right. I think it's tough because you probably do if they're in like mid-season form, but they've played like 9 competitive games together with a few new pieces. People are trying to find places to fit in. Kane is playing a role that he wasn't asked to play for
True.
3 or 4 years at Tottenham. He's really playing as like an out and out number 9. So I think it's a front line kind of finding their way together against a United team that is unbelievably disjointed and still managed to score 3. I think that's probably says more about Bayern being leaky at the back more than it does about United being a good side, if that makes a ton of sense there.
Yeah. And Pat, you can kind of take it away on the Champions League stuff if you have any takeaways at all to share on the pod about Man City and their 3-1 win.
I mean, I think that City are kind of doing the thing that City always do, where they start a little bit slow across the board. It was a relatively rotated lineup in that game. I think that the primary takeaways are Julian Alvarez and Rodri are absolute stars. Rodri is far and away the best midfielder in the world. I don't think anybody comes close to him right now. De Bruyne's injury didn't really change too much, which is crazy to say, but I mean, Alvarez is filling that role really well, even with a pretty stuttering Haaland. I think when he kind of gets back to his absolute best, which is funny to say because he scored 7 goals in 8 games to start the season, but I think when he kind of gets back to his brilliant best, hat tricks every other day kind of thing, we're going to be just fine. Guys like Doku have slotted in really well. Nunez put on a world-class performance in midfield. I just think they made a lot of right signings in the correct places, and all of the guys that they've brought in have fit the profile that City have kind of been looking for the past couple of years. And then, we're still, it just feels really tough for anybody to get close to City right now. And maybe that feels arrogant to say, but I think in the past we've seen that City are poor in Europe, and there was kind of like hurdles that this team had to keep getting over until like you could confidently call them the best team in Europe in all across all fronts, not just like the best team in Europe that like just can't get it together in the Champions League and things like that. I just think across the board, the City team is showing that nobody is near them in terms of overall quality. 5 wins in the Premier League already. We've only conceded 3 goals. And yes, we're going to concede goals. That's just going to happen. I think the team is finding the correct back four. And we have injuries in some weird places too. And, Rodri's had to play a full 90 minutes, almost 6 games in a row. A lot of little things like that are definitely going to come up. But I think once Jack Grealish gets back into the fold, once John Stones gets back into the fold, I think it's really tough to find a team that has more quality across the pitch than City, with a manager like Pep and a squad as unified as they are, with a spine that's been together as long as they are. It's really difficult for me to sit here and say that a team that isn't City is going to win the Champions League this year.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. I don't want to come across as naive because City did win the treble last year. I think the thing any of us haven't talked about yet is the difficulty of like going back to back in the Champions League. It's a feat that very few teams have done. I mean, when you look at like the Real Madrids, and I think Liverpool did it in the 80s. It is a really tough. It's like winning the Super Bowl back to back. It's not as much like we totally expect Man City to just go blaze through the group stages, go really deep in this tournament. But sometimes, like later on, just like things go against you. It's like the nature of this tournament. Hard games, home and away legs. You might have a difficult, long journey for one of them. Weird things can happen in this one. So I'm not getting too hot on City yet. They also had a pretty weak opponent match day 1. But like I think at the same time, everything you said, Pat, is true as well. They look like a great team.
Yeah, I don't think I can argue. I don't think I can sit here and argue with anything that you're saying. We've seen random bits of weirdness happen where the clear-cut best team in the world didn't win the Champions League, and they fell out to random things that happened. And I don't think that's crazy to say or crazy to assume that it's going to happen again this year. But I mean, I guess if nothing goes poorly and City play the way that we all know City should play, i.e. a team that just won a treble, they should win the Champions League again. And, in 3 months' time, when we do what we always do and lose in the quarterfinals, we can come back and clip this episode and put it on socials and make me sound really dumb. But until that day happens, I think I'm gonna ride on the fact that we're defending champions, and it feels like we could do what hasn't been done since the Real Madrid three-peat and go back-to-back.
Yeah, it's funny, too, because I feel like you're living in this era of almost like where PSG, Juventus, Real Madrid, and Barcelona are all kind of like hanging in flux. Like they're all kind of like building their new teams or like generations. And it's like a real time for you to just like absolutely make a haul in trophies. So we'll see if it can happen again this year.
Yeah, I'm just living in it, man. I sit here making history right now, and the last thing I'm going to do is sit here and pretend that I'm not enjoying it. And I know for a fact that it's not going to last forever. So exactly. I'm going to enjoy the time while I can.
We'll touch on some other European fixtures pretty quickly here in the other leagues now that Liverpool's a European or a Europa League team. We care about it. So we'll start away from Liverpool first. There was some fun ones, and we don't even have to say much on these, but Ajax Marseille finished 3-3 tonight, and Brighton lost to the team behind me, AEK Athens, 3-2 at home.
Yeah, the only I had a couple of the Ajax game I wanted to touch on because former City youth player Carlos Borges balled out for Ajax against Marseille. I really like to see him doing well, and I really want him to have an excellent career. And I think he's going to do just that, goal and an assist tonight in what was a really, really fun back and forth game. And yeah, Brighton were the team that I'm saying. They look like a team that's never played in Europe before, unfortunately. Great side, great manager. The Amex was bouncing. They just didn't have it that you need in Europe. And it's very evident that it's their first time in Europe. And unfortunately, I think it's going to carry through. I hope they get out of the group, but at the same time, for their legs and their league campaign, I kind of hope they just get knocked out in the group stage or get bumped down to the Conference League where they cannot really care about it.
Yeah, another team that, I mean, obviously has played in and won the Champions League, but didn't really look up to it tonight. Not in the Europa League, but actually down in the Conference League. Aston Villa, they lost a tough one to Legia Warsaw. Unai Emery looked pretty frustrated on the touchline, too. I don't think this year is starting exactly as he wanted or saw with this Villa side. Definitely some frustrations early on this year, I would say, for Emery.
Bring out your garlic.
One other European result in the Europa League to touch on before we go, just because this is a Premier League podcast. West Ham beating TSC Topola. Don't know if I pronounced that right. 3-1. Starting off the Europa League hot. James Ward-Prowse, man of the match.
Yeah, I saw that one. Had no idea how to pronounce the name, so I left it off.
Wanted to shout it out. Ward-Prowse apparently had a pretty good game. 2 assists.
Yeah. And then we'll end with Liverpool. Obviously, me and Mitch will have some stuff to say. Another 3-1 victory. I think coming into this one, Mitch, we wanted a big score line, clean sheet. The Reds just come in and just do everything we expect them to. And we get a 25-yard volley from a corner kick to start the match in the first 15 minutes, which is just
Worldy.
Like, what do we do?
It's unsavable. Nobody in the world is saving that shot. Gravenberch just a little late to it. Mm-hmm. I would guess. Splits his wickets and unfortunately in the back of the net. It's a story that I'm not enjoying. Starting games from behind.
Yeah.
I would really like to just go out and beat the piss out of teams like this. But you know, the boys kept the calm heads about them. Let the first half kind of dwindle, and we finally came out and put some pressure on in the second half. It was very, very exciting to see Gravenberch start finding his footing a little later in the game. I think in his first full game, it was a little shaky. I think once the confidence grows with the rest of the guys, and his positioning and his ability to find where guys are, it'll shake out. But another beautiful performance from Jurgen Klopp and bringing in the right subs at the right time to boost the team.
Yeah, 50 European wins now for Jurgen Klopp too with Liverpool, most of any Liverpool manager of all time, which is pretty impressive. I give one special shout out for Luis Diaz tonight. In a world, you know, Liverpool has a ton of world class players. He was just so standout tonight, and I don't think we give him the credit he deserves all the time for the work he does defensively. When we're talking about new age wingers, a lot of them don't do the defensive work. I mean,
No.
even we have Mo Salah, and he doesn't do it all the time. But Luis Diaz ran his ass off tonight in Austria. And I think that just kind of goes to credit him as a person, type of player he is. Gets his goal on that great pass from Gravenberch as well. So he's just had a terrific start to the year. It was worth every single penny and more for Liverpool. I think he might be one of our best players this year.
Absolutely, and I don't think there's a question about it. It's just nice to see a player come back so strong from injury.
Yeah.
Such a major injury just love having Lucho around.
Yeah.
What a guy.
And in a team where we often have a hard time going out and like winning a game, especially since we've had some big players leave. He feels like a guy that can just grab the game by the scruff of the neck and go out and win it for you. So
I felt like I have two other quick notes. I thought Endo played a really, really good game too, dropping back into coverage and making the stops he needed to, the tackles and the pressure. And I thought Harvey Elliott had a great game too, all things considered.
Yeah, that's what we have on Liverpool. It's going to be a weird kind of Europa League campaign. We're going to see some weird lineups, some weird games, but it is what it is. We're kind of in it for the long haul here. Like me and Mitch said, we're looking forward to Dublin, so we want to go far and win something in this tournament if we're going to be playing in it on Thursday nights.
Absolutely.
But that's the Europa League or Champions League review, whatever you want to call it. We have more kind of special content episodes coming up here shortly. Like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. Any final notes, boys?
Any Mainers Sunday at the Zoo, 2:00. USL to Portland. Open house, town meeting. How are we calling it? Town hall.
Yeah, it's town hall.
Town hall. Come have your voice heard. Support the club. 2025 USL is coming to Portland. Be there at the Zoo Sunday at 2:00.
Word. Later, boys.
Deuces.